Hello, Guillermo. Do you hear us? Hello.
Hi.
Do you see us? Do you hear us? Okay.
Yes, everything okay.
Okay, great. We are happy that you managed to join and that you are here with us today. Okay, so now we can begin. I will just briefly give us some introduction, and then we will go straight to Guillermo's presentation. Once again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sara Vukotic, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the third session of our online seminar series, Transdisciplinary Research on Cultures and Identities in East Central Europe. With today's seminar, we continue to fulfill the aim of this series, which is actually to promote open academic discussions and interdisciplinary exchange. Before we begin, I would like to also introduce our today's guests and the theme of this session. So today we have the pleasure of hosting Guillermo Hernandez Munoz, who will present his PhD thesis titled OBERIU and the Theater of the Absurd, the Parisian and the Petersburgian Absurd. Guillermo has recently defended his PhD thesis at the University of Madrid, where he specializes in the European absurd and avant-garde movements. In this particular session, he will share key insights into the commonalities and differences between the two European concepts of absurd, as well as the various conceptations of the avant-garde. So as with our previous seminars, today's session will follow a similar structure. So our speaker will have 20 minutes for their presentation, and then 20 minutes discussion will follow. This will once again be a chance for us to ask questions, share thoughts, and provide feedback to support our speakers' research. So with that, I would like to conclude and give the word to Guillermo. Guillermo, do you maybe have some presentation to share, or?
Yes, I do.
Okay, you can do it now. Do you have the?
Yeah, the share screen, right?
Yeah.
Let me see.
I think that you have the access now, so it will. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So can you see if I do it like this? Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't move, so maybe you have to share the whole screen or the whole window.
If I do it, well, there's no animation. So if I do it like this, you can see it move?
Yeah, it moves. Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, I'll just do it like this.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, sorry for the delay. As you have been told, I had my Viva on the last Thursday, so I'm still recovering from that, and also I'm working at the same time. So sorry. I was
okay. Sorry to hear that, but
girls. So basically, what I'm going to do is repeat what I did on Thursday, because I just defended the thesis, so I have it fresh. So yeah, my research is on the avant-garde, but it's focused on the Russian avant-garde and the more West European avant-garde. So yeah, maybe here this is not too welcomed, because I don't focus too much on the Balkan avant-garde, but hopefully it will be useful anyway. And there's some point of commonality. The origin of my thesis is that for those of you who know the OBERIU, there's always this idea on the academic literature that there are massive similarities between the theater of the absurd and the OBERIUs, but nobody had dared go into why this is the case, or to analyze it a bit more in depth. As you can see there, for example, their friend Druskin, which was also member of the Chinari, which was a group most of the OBERIU also were members of. He didn't die in the 40s with Stalin. He survived. And he was the one, in fact, that saved everything from harms. And he said himself in the 80s this bold assertion that the theater of the absurd was created in Russia 15 to 20 years before. And then also at the end, what is key there is that it says that it arose independently from them. So this was just left to chance or to some miracle that the theater of the absurd was basically what the OBERIUs had done, but 20 years later and with no contact whatsoever. So from there, I went to some questions about this. How could this be explained? These similarities that are repeated in the academic literature. Was it because there was some familiarity with the works, because they shared common sources, because the trauma of the wars had something in common in both cases, with the rising on Stalinism and the First War, and then the Second World War for the Parisians, and then whether this was a reaction against modernism. And what is clear is that it wasn't because of familiarity with the authors, because I researched everything, all the diaries, all the articles, even primary works like Note de Compte, Note de UNESCO, or Beckett's correspondence. And they were completely unaware of OBERIU. In fact, UNESCO wrote about Mayakovsky, for example, and he said he was influenced by him. But then he said that from the middle of the 20s onwards, the avant-garde in Russia was completely dead. So he was clearly unaware of OBERIU because they started their activity in the late 20s. With that incognita cleared, the main thing there was it was to see if it was worth exploring this, if there was such a significant commonality that justified the analysis. And yes, there was. There are some examples that they look almost like plagiarism from UNESCO, for example. There's some stories that I don't have time to get into, that they look exactly the same. That from some of Harms, for example, there's some sensibility, a shared sensibility, and that is striking. So with that question answered, the idea was to how can these intersections be explained when there was no contact, either physically or in time. There was just no contact whatsoever. There was a massive split there. So the methodology I used, it was to try to understand this from the inside, shall we say. So I didn't try to revisit the avant-garde from a modern contemporary perspective. I tried to use what was active then and what was more predominant then, to try to see why and to analyze it from the inside. So what was more in vogue then was literary theory. We started with formalism, and I followed the regimes of relevance concept. That is something that Professor Galin Tihanov explored, and I spent 3 months with Galin in Queen Mary University of London. And what this means, what this says, is that there's a lot of different ways of approaching the study of literature, and obviously nowadays literary theory is not the predominant way to analyze literature, but it was in this epoch that I was analyzing. So I use a synchronic, as I said there, methodology that started in the early 20th century, and then it finished more or less, let's say, in the Tartu School of semiotics, just because I needed to use Toporov and Lotman for some of my analysis. It was still relevant because they were talking about things in this period, even if they came a bit later. And I also mixed this with Bakhtin. I also used Bakhtin's ideas because there was as some of you may be aware, Bakhtin and the formalists were always fighting each other. But this fight, or this infighting, was quite revelatory in the end, and they both complemented each other quite well. So I tried to use both methodologies and their dialogue. In terms of the historical, philosophical, and theological context, what was surprising is that Bergson was very important for the Russians too. In fact, almost more than the French side. Bergson was very influential in Russia in the early 20th century, and it also fit very well with orthodoxy in Russia. They had this concept of intuition, using both the mind, the intellect to its limits, and then using intuition for the final leap. So Bergson was very welcome also in the Orthodox circles in Russia, but also he influenced the Parisians via Alfred Jarry, and then UNESCO was also part of the school that Jarry started, the College of Pataphysics. There's also some connection there with existentialism. The Russians had, let's say, the religious existentialists, all like Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky, that in the end they left the final leap of faith when the mind couldn't go any further to in hands of God. And this is something that, of course, Sartre and Camus didn't do. They rejected this, and they attacked Dostoevsky, for example, for this. And this is also reflected in the theater of the absurd. There's no, it doesn't have this orthodox sensibility or this final leap of faith that the Russian had. And then it is true that they had a similar traumatic experience with with Stalin and with the wars, but it is also true that it is accepted that the futurists and the formalists started their activity before the First War. So it only served to shape a bit their ideas, but they were already in the air by the turn of the century. So this is interesting to explore further, but it wasn't as essential as it looks at the beginning. And then there's also an interesting point here to focus on the vanguards, because for many people the avant-garde means something that's very progressive, that's always wanting to break the mold and to advance. But there's another school that thinks that the avant-garde is actually very, very conservative, including UNESCO, because it means a return to a previous form, a previous current, rather than just wanting to innovate for the sake of it. But in Russia, for example, there was this other strand called left art, and this was something that is a bit related to Dada, in which the aim was to never calcify into any current. So in this sense, this was very progressive because they never wanted to become anything established. There was an incredible energy there that, as long as something started to feel a bit calcified, they broke it. So there's the fight there between these two currents of the avant-garde. Then I did some comparative analysis of the theater and the prose, because the poetry is very lacking on the theater of the absurd, and even if it's very relevant for the OBERIU. What they had in common is that in the prose, both of them go towards nothingness, and nothingness is very important in their prose, because the idea of writing coming from nothing and being artificial, and also the concept of writing as violence, which both is shared by Beckett, for example, and Harms. And their theater has in common this absence of plot and this subordination of the dramatic text. Yeah, sorry about the translations. That was just Google translating. So yeah, all the elements like sound, the pictorial element, all had the same relevance on stage, and there was a massive subordination of the text there. So with this, we get to the differences. The OBERIU had this was inscribed within this orthodox paradigm, with the icon, for example, that means that God is the only one who can understand and use language properly, and humans the only thing they can do is to try to intuit reality that's beyond words. So the word is a bit devalued there. Something that doesn't happen in the theater of the absurd, with where the word is everything, even if it's completely inadequate. There's no such a big role for intuition. Then the Petersburg text was very important for the OBERIU. They used their vocabulary, their thesaurus, and they're well within this tradition. And the theater of the absurd didn't have anything similar. Paris wasn't very important or central to them. They didn't have any tradition like this. The existentialism we have already seen. And then also a big difference is that, at least at the beginning, the Russian avant-garde and the OBERIU had a firm belief that the art could make change in society and in everyday life, while for the theater of the absurd, this was not so clear. It was more deconstructive, and it saw the inadequacy of the moment, of language, but it didn't propose any way out of it. The similarities were rejection of positivism, scientific positivism, the union of context and absurd form. For example, Camus didn't do this, so that's why he's not considered so much absurd, because, for example, his theater plays are all about the context and the content, but the form is completely classical. They're both strangely between modernism and postmodernism, even if 20 years separate them. They start to question the role of the author. And by the end, for example, Baginov really devalues the notion of the author. There's also this identification with the violence and the author. And rather than a reaction against the bourgeoisie, what both did was react against Philistinism. But they were not so much politically motivated, wanting to attack the bourgeoisie per se. So with this, we go back to the questions at the beginning, and we get that at best, some of these things are half answered, but not completely. They had some common sources, but also some different sources. The trauma is important, but in the Russian case, it started before the war, so the seeds were already there. And it was a reaction against modernism, but to different degrees. Depending on the authors, some of them were could be inscribed within modernism a bit more, and some of them were completely already almost postmodern. This is more focused on my thesis. In terms of the absurd, there can be seen two currents within both groups. One that is metaphysical, to express the inexpressible, or the unnameable, like Beckett will say, and one that is more concrete and mundane, like Harms at the end, that became a bit more concrete, his absurd, and that it can be seen also a lot in UNESCO. And then I'll end. I wanted my thesis not to be some authoritative voice that defined everything and presented a final result, very clear, and nothing could be said about it. I prefer it to be a bit more Bakhtinian, in the sense that I left the different voices speak for themselves, and then I introduced my own moderation there. But I would love for it to be a starting point for other things. Like I would love the figure of the avant-gardist as an exile to be further explored. And this could be seen as even internal exiles, like Mayakovsky, Malevich, and OBERIU were clearly exiled in their own country, both culturally and also physically. At some point, they were sent somewhere else. And also, a lot of the people in Paris, similarly, they were voluntarily exiled. UNESCO, Beckett, and Zara all came from outside. And if someone has the resources and the energy to do a more interdisciplinary approach, also to focus on this trauma and the relationship of avant-garde and trauma, but then you will need there a lot of other branches to come together, sociology and even psychology. There's something that could be a good starting point from there. And with that, I'll stop, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Guillermo.
Sorry. I should say that I should also thank Kristina Pranjic because she helped with the thesis. She evaluated it at the end, and she gave me some good tips. So there's some relation with Nova Gorica University.
Nice, we are glad. Thank you for this presentation. Kristina, did you want maybe something to say, or you will after? I just wanted to say thank you to Guillermo, and of course congratulations as well on successfully defending your PhD. Good job. So yeah, and although you have formally concluded maybe with this phase of your research, we now have the opportunity to maybe engage in some discussion and perhaps pose some questions that may enrich your further thinking or working on this theme. So with that, I would like to open up the discussion. If anybody has any questions, comments, feel free to speak.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you, Guillermo, for this presentation. What I would like to hear more about, I think the analysis that you did, that would be something that I think was not here presented, but the works you included and how you kind of, did the analysis part. I think that would kind of enrich also the presentation.
Yeah, you're right. It was this was a bit more focused on people that had read my thesis, so I didn't want to repeat. But yeah, it is true for someone that is not acquainted with my thesis, it will be a bit more difficult. The works were from the OBERIU. It was Harm's theater plays or play, because they didn't have a lot of them. Elisabetta Vam. Then there was Vedensky's Christmas at the Ivanovs, and this was compared with UNESCO's La Cantatrice Chauve and with Beckett's Waiting for Godot, of course. And then in the prose, I couldn't use Vedensky because he didn't write so much prose. He always wanted to write verse, and he actually criticized Harms when he became a bit more traditionalist or a bit more classical in his writing, a bit more started to write longer prose. He said, "I, for one, haven't left art." So I used Harms and Vaginov. Vaginov was very interesting because he's quite of a postmodernist. At the end, he really approached postmodernism, and he has 3 or 4 novels. And I used also the short stories by Harms, in his cycle Incidences, and his very famous story, The Old Woman, which is a bit longer. As I said, Vaginov's novels, and then I compared them with Beckett mainly, with his trilogy, or the trilogy he doesn't want to be a trilogy, The Unnameable, Murphy, and Malone Dice. And I didn't go too much into UNESCO because his writing was quite also, it wasn't too representative of the theater of the absurd. It was a bit more traditional in his ways. So yeah, I made a comparison with the writing from one side and with the theater on the other side. And out of this comparison is where I reached this this conclusion that they both share this writing from nothing and about nothing, and this shared writing as violence, and then all the commonalities in the theater too.
Thank you, Christina, for the question, and Guillermo for the answer. Do we maybe have some more questions? Comments?
Yeah, I was also wondering, because we had this our first presentation of the series was Tijana Koprivica's on this illustrated books, and it's very common, right, to kind of avant-gardists to engage in visual material, and Russian avant-garde was quite connected, right, with this visual images and kind of playing with words, with language. So I was interested. Probably this is kind of out of scope of your thesis, but still the question is, because you also have Malevich here on the PowerPoint. So I was wondering if there is also the aspect of visual that I'm not familiar with the ones the absurdists in Paris, but of course they had a very rich avant-garde. Of course, the Picasso and everything that we know about that. But can you maybe say something about that? Can you compare? Was it also because Harms's work is very visual, and all the Russian avant-gardists. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also thought later on a posteriori about saying something about that presentation. They had a massive connection, Malevich and OBERIU. They were part of the same groups, and Malevich shaped some of his ideas together with OBERIU. And OBERIU was also influenced by Malevich and his suprematist ideas. So there's a lot in the dissertation there about him, but specifically about books and illustrations. It is also good because it's the only chance to have women avant-gardists there in this area, because all of the writers were men, but at least the illustrators were women, some of them, and they illustrated some books by OBERIU, but children's books, of course, because that's the only thing they could publish. It is very interesting because, they did mix illustrations and writing, but only in these children's books. But they wanted to give it a bit of a flavor also of the avant-garde. So it'd be interesting also to analyze that, because you can see there also that interconnection there, and whether these illustrations are usually focused on children's books, but in this case, it was like that, but because it was a bit forced. And Harms in his also it's very interesting to see Harms' writing, because, as you said, he was very pictorial, but also in his writings, he's also writing and drawing things on the sides. He a lot of times accompanies his writings with some formula or some secret sign. So it is also very interesting, but it is lost in most editions. That this never appears, maybe as an appendix. But if you actually look at his diaries or his writings, they have images all over the place. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see why that was not published or those decisions made there. Yeah, they had this concept of the hieroglyph that was more literary, but sometimes he also mixed it a bit with pictorial representations, because he was very interested in the occult. So yeah, something maybe to explore there.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Guillermo. Maybe that's some new theme for the further research. You can think about that. Do we maybe have some more questions or comments for our guests? No? Okay. Then we can conclude this third session of our seminar. Guillermo, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for presenting your research, and good luck in all your further research. And thank you all also for joining us today, and see you again in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.